Hey everyone, this is Dave here and we're looking at Sniper Ghost Warrior 3, the latest title from CI Games that uses the CryEngine. So CryEngine then, what games do you think of when thinking about this technology? On the one hand, we've got titles like Evolve and Rise, great games that look good on console and perform very well. And on the other hand, we've got stuff like Lichdom Battlemage and Homefront the Revolution. The games look pretty decent, but in terms of performance they fall short. So that brings us to Sniper Ghost Warrior 3. Where does this game stand? Well, unfortunately it's in the latter category. From a visual perspective, all the latest rendering technology that CryEngine provides is here and looks pretty nice. You've got an open world environment and accomplished use of various effects and lighting. But the one area where the game fails to deliver is in terms of performance, and both consoles get hit pretty hard. But before I get into that, let's take a look at some of the basics. In terms of resolution, there's no real surprises here. Native 1080p on PS4, 900p on Xbox One. And as we've seen with many titles before, the difference in image quality is quite subtle. You get a slight extra refinement on PlayStation 4, but the differences don't always stand out. In this case, that's because the game features a lot of post-processing, film grain, depth of field, chromatic aberration, and all this means that while PlayStation 4 does have a resolution advantage, it's not a huge boost as you might expect. Beyond pixel counts though, there isn't really that much to separate them with regards to the core visual elements. Textures, geometry, visual effects, these are all a match between platforms. The only difference that does sometimes vary on console is streaming. The PlayStation 4 is often a little bit slower, so as this scene demonstrates, notice the simpler geometry and missing texture layer on the building here, just to the right, where these elements don't load until the camera moves closer to them. Alternatively though, if you take a close look at the foliage, you'll notice that it's present on the rooftop on PS4 but not on Xbox One. We actually find that these elements are randomized to an extent, so replaying this scene and these particular objects can appear in slightly different places. But really the biggest difference here is in terms of raw pixel count, where the PlayStation 4 does feature a slight advantage. Ultimately though, it's performance we have the issue with. CryEngine doesn't have a good track record on consoles, unless it's a game produced by in-house developers Crytek, whereby the technology is clearly specifically optimized around the console target platform, but that doesn't really appear to be the case here. Both versions target 30 frames per second as expected, but unfortunately neither offers up a consistently smooth experience throughout. In terms of the PlayStation 4, you've probably noticed this by now. The game fluctuates between 30 to 32 FPS, causing stutter even if the frame rate isn't being impacted. This is actually the same phenomenon we noticed in Homefront the Revolution, and this means the experience isn't quite as smooth as it should be, even when there's no hit to performance. Now this isn't as much of a problem on Xbox One, but that's simply because the game struggles to hit 30 FPS on a regular basis, and the results really aren't great. The heavy drops in frame rate often make the controls feel weighty due to the increase in input lag, and of course the inconsistency in frame rate causes noticeable judder to appear on screen, which is really distracting, especially when you're trying to make precise shots from a distance. It's actually not uncommon to see performance fall into the mid to low 20s at times, and when this happens the action is really impacted. It's really not great. That said, the PS4 isn't immune to these problems either, and while performance does reach 30 FPS a lot more often, there are times when frame rates are impacted to pretty much the same degree on Xbox One. Here detail-rich areas appear to be the cause, where an abundance of foliage and alpha effects is clearly putting strain on memory bandwidth. This means that the action frequently goes from feeling quite responsive to extremely laggy when engaging enemies, and this is particularly annoying when taking down targets from a distance. And that's the point of the game. You're a sniper constantly zooming in and out of the scenery, and this is usually when frame rates get hit. Streaming is another potential cause here, as you can quickly see the engine switching between detail levels when zooming in and out of the scenery. In any case, both versions fail to hit 30 FPS when under load, and this really has an impact on the gameplay. Between the two, it's fair to say that the PlayStation 4 game does indeed fare better. After all, there are more opportunities where the game hits 30 frames per second, but at the same time, performance is still really variable, and there are times where heavy frame rate drops cause a lot of stutter and loss of controller response, and this is quite disappointing, as I actually feel that the gameplay has quite a lot of merit. Having to carefully survey the environment, take down enemies without alerting others to your presence can actually form quite an engrossing gameplay experience. It's just unfortunate that shoddy performance tends to get in the way fairly often. It's also worth noting that some of these issues are also present in other CryEngine games too, but in the case of titles like Homefront Revolution, some of these problems were resolved after several updates. Of course, it's a tall order to ask for a solid 30 FPS in Sniper Ghost Warrior 3, but hopefully CI Games can at least improve aspects of the game's frame rate in a future update. So it's fair to say that PS4 and Xbox One don't really offer up an ideal experience here, but is there any benefit to going to PlayStation 4 Pro? Well, in terms of getting a resolution boost, no. The game runs at native 1080p on both base hardware and on the Pro, regardless whether you have the machine set to 4K or 1080p output. And from what we've seen so far, there doesn't appear to be any other significant upgrades with regards to graphical quality. We've only spent a short amount of time with the title, but from what we've seen so far, draw distance, asset quality and effects work appears to be identical to the base PS4 hardware. That's not to say there aren't any upgrades for PS4 Pro owners. In this case, it's performance that gets a boost. The good news is those heavy frame rate drops down to the mid to low 20s are eliminated on the Pro, at least in this sequence here where both PS4 and Xbox One really struggle to get anywhere near 30 FPS when zooming in and out using the sniper scope. On Pro there are some minor dips down to around 27 FPS, but the experience is a lot smoother here. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a welcome improvement over the base PS4 experience. However, performance isn't perfect and there's one aspect that remains unresolved, and that's the incorrect frame delivery. Frame rates still go above 30 FPS, ranging between 30 to 32 FPS, and this causes stutter in areas where performance isn't impacted, just like on base hardware. So while PS4 Pro does indeed give us a better overall experience, it's not a perfect run, and there's definitely room for improvement here. But for now, out of the three, the Pro version is the best way to play the game. Okay, so before we wrap up, there's one last thing to cover, and that's loading times. With loading lasting for anything up to 4 to 5 minutes, that's not trivial. In terms of the two versions, neither perform great here. PS4 gains between 5 to a 10-second advantage, but when you're looking up to 4 minutes, that's nothing. You're spending a lot of time sitting there watching a progress bar. It's pretty ridiculous, and not something we really expect in a current generation game. Sure, we understand that open world titles are going to have to move some hefty amounts of data around, but clever use of streaming and prefetching data could make things a lot faster. It's another area that we feel the developer really needs to look into. To wrap up then, none of the console versions of Ghost Warrior 3 deliver a perfect experience. PS4 Pro is perhaps the best here. Performance is a little more solid than on the base PS4 hardware and Xbox One, though there are still some issues that need to be worked out. Anyway, I think that's pretty much it. As ever, if you enjoyed our videos, then don't forget to like or subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.